with the Riverview project completed in Pincher Creek, we'll be at 1,800 megawatts in Alberta, which is a pretty good advance. Saskatchewan is just about to start construction on a 200 megawatt wind farm as well. That'll almost double their capacity. So this is like strictly on the wind side. So we'll start with wind, and I'll go to solar, and then I'll go to the community investing piece. So this is easily found on the Canwea website, and it's just a nice little snapshot. We're not really a world leader per se, but I mean, we really could be. There's so much wind resources in different parts of the country, and we have this gigantic population mass right south of us that we really should have been selling more electrons to for a while. Quickly on Saskatchewan, I'm not going to talk too much about them because obviously there's less happening there, and this is Alberta. But there are some interesting things. So if you're looking for job or contracting opportunities, it's not so far away, and basically between Swift Current, like this whole pocket in here is sort of their renewable energy hot zone. They've got these two 10 megawatt solar farms and these two new wind farms going in to this sort of area east and south of Swift Current. So they have a really excellent wind resource there, and it's right on the main highway and on the grid. They have a pretty good renewable energy goal, but it's not going to be too difficult for them since it's a fairly small grid. But yeah, some of the people I was working with on the job in Pincher Creek, they were already making plans to go to the Golden South wind farm right after. So these wind turbine technicians and construction workers, they just go from site to site across the country. You know, it's great for single folks for sure. A little bit hard on families, but yeah, we have this sort of nomadic Canadian wind turbine construction community that roves around and gets these farms built. It's actually a fairly small pool, so there's room for new folks, Alberta residents, get in on these projects. Otherwise, Ontarians and Polish people and people from everywhere. Not there's anything wrong with that, but they're going to come and take the jobs. That's what's happening down there already. So there is room for, and I am collecting resumes, so we can talk about that later. Feel free to email me. So this is the SAPE, Southern Alberta Alternative Energy Partnership, which has been around for 10 years now. It's an economic development initiative in Southern Alberta between the three different ECDEV groups down there, and they kind of, when there's something to really share with their communities, they pop up and they update things. So I built this map for them, and this is, all these pins are projects, either operational or under development. And it's based off the list of projects you find on the ASO website, where they have a queue. Anyone who wants to get interconnection will go on this giant Excel spreadsheet, which is a lot less fun to read than this. You know, this is the same thing, but you can just click in there and see who's who and where they're at. So that's a handy resource for you all if you're not aware of it, to keep track of actual what's happening in the corporate sector, I guess, if you will. And of course, not all of these projects can be built. So some people will say, oh, this is going to be too much renewable energy. You know, this is going to be a blight on the landscape and everything else like that. And that notwithstanding, I mean, this only a fraction of these black pins will probably go all the way to construction. That said, I've been pleasantly surprised over the last 12 months of the number of projects that have come out of the woodwork that weren't even on this page, like Warren Buffett and his rattlesnake project. Thanks. You know, interesting surprises happening. Okay, so trying to avoid too much text in my slides, but anyway, you're familiar with the ASO REP program, which is, this is its little, you know, rest in peace there, 2015 to 2019. Regardless, it really had a huge impact for the short amount of time it was around, and over 1,300 megawatts of new wind energy, opened the door to competitive market pricing, and it's about close to $2 billion in total capital expenditures on these projects, and we figured out that the local spending impact of that, whether it's jobs, you know, local purchasing of materials and goods, works out to about $240 million across southern Alberta. So it's definitely not a bad impact at all. This was actually the first time that a lot of the municipalities and the provincial government themselves had saw what the economic impact of these projects really was going to be, estimated across like taxes and land leases and everything else. And it was like, oh, we're all for renewables, yes. So there was actually a statement that came out that you'll see in a bit that they don't plan on changing the renewables target that was legislated. So that was kind of news to me. This was Rep round one. You've probably seen this, but for some of this might be new. It's on the ASO website. These two are under construction now. That one is built, completed, and on budget and on time. These are late. This one's very late. They have some serious approval delay stuff happening near Oyen for that project, so that's probably the one trouble spot there. But this is round 2, and these projects, this one's going into construction this year, so there's jobs there. This one I don't know about where they're at, but it's not very big. It shouldn't take long to mobilize. I expect that will be starting something this year. And EDF is likely a next year project, and that's right east of Medicine Hat. And then there's 3 more projects. So TransAlta is getting a jump on this one. They're going into construction starting in March, so right away. So decent paying wind power construction jobs down there. For the record, it's about $25 to $32 an hour, tons of hours, and a living out allowance that's comparable to oil and gas jobs. So it's not bad. You can make 8 to 10,000 a month without any trouble. So that's why these people travel across the country for projects. It's kind of, once you get into that, it's hard to get out, right? And then a couple more up near Jenner area. There's actually a whole cluster of things happening in Jenner. There's like this renewable energy hotspot there with solar and wind projects. So it's kind of interesting to keep track of that area. So I'd like to play a little video. Do you like little videos?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is this a good time for a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Could you characterize, excuse me, trying to have my mouth full just at the moment that it's ready. Could you characterize what some of the delays are, such as the one that you mentioned at Oyen? What would be characterizing the delays that they have?
Well, the delays at like the Riverview project in Pincher Creek was first was the final AUC permit on the whole package that really would allow them to start ordering materials. Took about a month and a half to 2 months longer than they had hoped. So it was an AUC, paperwork basically.
Okay.
And then after that, Vestas turbines were in such hot supply worldwide that they had a hard time getting them.
Oh.
And those were the only ones they could get. The others were all in hot supply too, so you couldn't get the other turbines. So Vestas turbines were a few months delayed.
Oh.
So that's largely what it's going to end up being, is either permitting or turbines.
Okay, so it's not other things such as zoning or community acceptance?
In Oyen, it was a community acceptance piece, so they had to go back to a hearing, and then they ruled everything was kosher, and then they wanted to change. They actually reduced a number of the turbines to help satisfy some of the community concerns, but that created a further delay. Now it had to be recertified under this new layout, right? So a little bit painful, bittersweet for them in the sense of, as far as I know now, they're in a better place with the community and with the acceptance around it, but it's a year behind schedule, and that causes some financial penalties based on how the original contracts were worded. So yeah, that project's not the most the brightest spot, but there's always winners and losers.
Tying into the transmission network, does that cause delays as well? The utility connecting up?
Not usually, because projects get sited where they know there's some capacity. The only way that can cause delays is if you've got other people vying for that same connection area, and they get their paperwork approved sooner than you do, and now you're basically pulling that project off the shelf.
Okay, so that might be happening at Jenner, but not at some other place where they like Oyen.
Yeah, I think so. I think in Jenner actually it's good. That's why that cluster is happening there, because nothing's been built there yet. So you've got this excess grid capacity. So how long, much longer that goes, I don't know. But yeah, so it can be. You're right. Interconnection, permitting, and turbine supplies.
Yeah.
You mentioned right at the beginning that there was a few turbines being tear down in Ontario.
Right.
Why is that? The end of the age?
No, they're brand new. They're projects under construction.
Oh,
It's
why are they being turned down?
it's Doug. Well, Doug Ford is essentially.
Ford had a better idea.
It's just for political reasons, basically. He's pandering to the people that don't like the turbines in the area who voted for him, and it's a very visible, easily visible way of being like, we're against more wind power in Ontario. And so that's the way of like, yeah, it's a pretty convincing statement. Well, yeah, the industry has taken note. Nobody's planning on building a wind farm there for a long time. So.
Wow.
And so the second there's 2 projects, he's tearing out another one, and they're taking them to court and going to fight it and try and like actually have it rejected. So Yeah, that said, you know, it's the nuclear industry, it's a number of different factors. Ontario is very complicated. You think Alberta's that, it's like, wow. I picked 2 little videos. Is there any other questions quickly before I hit play on this?
Thank you.
Okay, yeah?
I want to talk to you at the end of the day for a job.
A job. I'm not technically hiring, but there is a lot of hiring going on. I would love your resume.
I have another question. So,
Yeah.
there have been some studies that said that some wind power, the turbines are affecting people's health if they're within I can't remember what the proximity was, just the noise and what the relations are. Is that got anything to do with the objections?
So to clarify that, there have been some concerns that wind turbines are affecting people's health, and there have been some studies that have shown they do not.
Okay.
Well, if Donald Trump said it, it's got to be true, right?
Thank you, Donald Trump. You know, he made wind power go viral like no other like wind advocate could have. I couldn't believe it. It's like that speech was like great for us because it really, this whole like how many birds do wind turbines actually kill meme started going around where it showed a graph with the comparative to, you know, to buildings, to cars, to power lines, and to cats, and it came out at the very bottom. So it's like, you know, cats. Thank the Don for that one, I guess. Yeah. So these 2 videos, one's from Bull Creek, and another one's from a project in England. But I chose them because they do a pretty good job of showing some of the different actual job opportunities, different roles on a project site. So see how many you can count as we go through. I didn't, so don't feel obliged to. But let's start with this. You're not going to hear much because it's only on my computer. It didn't go through, eh?
Do you have a full screen option?
There we go.
Oh my God.
These are a little different because they had pier style foundations instead of the large platforms. It uses less concrete, it goes deeper. Have any of you been up close to a wind turbine under construction or foundations? Yeah.
Randolph, do they play this music while they're building it?
Yeah, I don't know. 12-hour days are common. When the wind's not blowing, you work as long as possible and try and get some momentum.
How do you guys get up way high? Do they train you up? Or how do you get up there?
Climb the ladder.
Ladder on the inside.
Beam me up, Scotty.
These are roughly three megawatts each. That's sort of the average number these days. So yeah, actually. Yeah, it's roughly 10 turbines at roughly 3 megawatts each per per unit. So it's not a big wind farm, but it's a lovely spot. So that gives you a really nice sort of insight into what it's like on a job site and the capacity of some of these turbines.
So per turbine, like how long did that take? Kind of missed that. How long does it take from say, pouring the foundation?
To put one up?
Yeah.
Well, to give you, if you were gonna say build one of those, say on a farm where it's a community co-op, for example, everybody, yeah, then you would probably take about 2 to 3 days to do the rebar and the foundation, the concrete, and dig the hole, and then you let that cure for a couple days, and then about two days to erect the turbine. So the actual construction of it is about a week, right, per unit. It's all the development and planning and everything that goes up in front of it. So here's some of you won't be able to read these maybe, but this just gives you a kind of a rundown of everybody who's involved in building a wind farm. So it starts with the developer who has the idea, who sees a location, who checks with the grid to see if there's capacity there, and then starts taking risks every single day of their life with everything they have, basically, to develop this project and attract the investors and crunch the numbers and do all the measurements with the engineers and the field biologists and analyze all the data, and then more engineers. And then if everything checks out and you get approved, you go to construction. This piece is important with the PPA, right? The power purchase agreement, or some kind of a deal with somebody. So the two main things are, for sure, good access to the grid, and that your power is going to actually be funneled through, which isn't always guaranteed, and who's actually paying for the electricity. Is it going to be a government tender? Is it going to be the school board? Is it going to be IKEA or someone else? Who are you going to do a deal with to actually buy that, or are you just going to sell it into the pool and hope you don't get zero for your wind power when it blows? Because that's what happens a lot of days. And so once you go to construction, then here come the truckers and the equipment operators and the crane operators. Those are the beginning of it. Offload all the equipment with the rigging crews, rebar and concrete crews build the foundations, and iron workers and millwrights work with the cranes to erect the turbines, and electricians pull in all the cable and tie it all in. Rope access technicians and operations teams for operations and maintenance, and more engineers to actually start the facility and ensure everything's running properly, which can take a couple of months of checking and troubleshooting. So yeah, that's everybody required to work on a wind project. So if you see anything familiar there, or if any of that is, yeah?
Just, sorry to interrupt, Rand, just a question, what kind of payback do you get off of a large wind farm, 100 megawatts, 150?
Well, again, the only real answer is it depends. Depends on the value of the PPA, depends on how consistent the wind resource is, and depends on your grid, basically. So curtailment is an issue, which means you're being shut out of selling your power because there's too much energy on the grid or not enough demand. Then that's going to affect your payback. So I never answer the payback question with a specific number, because there isn't one. Yeah.
Can you comment on the operations and maintenance costs you typically have on either a per turbine basis or on a farm? What does that look like? What's involved? What does it cost?
Usually there's a metric per megawatt. So if you have a 100 megawatt wind project, you budget, 400,000 or 500,000 a year, say, for operations, and it may very well be less, or it might come in more if you had a catastrophic failure on something. But generally, it's getting better and better every year. The actual cost to maintain a facility is decreasing as there's more automation, and they're able to catch problems before they happen from a laptop in an office in Calgary, as opposed to sending a whole crew down there. And so they're able to be a lot more precise with it than they used to be. So that's one thing about these projects. A negative is they're not great long-term permanent job creators. Solar farms especially, terrible. You can have a 100 megawatt solar farm with 2 people looking after it, and hire some people to cut the grass from the local community a couple of times a year. They're not really they're meant to kind of just run by themselves. It's the sun that's doing the work. It's the wind that's doing the work. It's not people that have to be there turning dials and levers all the time. So that's one of the beautiful things about it too. But you know, it frees us up to have more leisure time. But yeah, we know how that one goes. Yeah.
One more question about, as far as for technicians' sake, would you characterize this as being dangerous work? Construction often is.
Yeah, it is. I mean, that's why there's a ton of safety measures with it. I mean, the crushing hazards are massive there, right?
That's right.
But overall, it's not really dangerous if you're following procedures.
In projects that have gone forward in Alberta or in Canada, are there any stats around how many injuries and or fatalities?
Mostly injuries and deaths, unfortunately, and as we've just learned very recently from a project that's happening in Vauxhall, are on the way to work or on the way home.
Same as oil and gas.
Yeah, that's where people really die and get compromised. That said, overall the stats are quite good in terms of on-site. I think some of the biggest issues you might actually have, again, piece of reality, is issues with substance abuse on site. So that can become a thing that can compromise people's situations. But yeah, generally the actual incident thing, it's about under 5%, I think, in terms of lost time.
Do you have a rough number for jobs per megawatt?
Yeah, it's roughly 150 jobs per 100 megawatts of wind.
150 per 100.
And that's roughly the same for solar too. 150 construction jobs per 100 megawatts of project.
Construction jobs, or how about the development? How about the left-hand column?
And this, that's harder to quantify. I think over the course of, say, an average, let's say a 5-year development cycle, you might have a couple of hundred people that end up having a contract or being involved in the project for either for the duration or for a few months. As a field biologist, you might work on a project for a couple of weeks, 4 times a year. Right? You know what I mean? So it's a spring, summer, fall, and winter measurements. Then you send in your data, and that's it. Some of these people are going to be going full time, like accountants, data analysts, engineers, the developers. So yeah, there's probably a couple hundred people involved on a project over the course of that development cycle. But yeah, when I put this list together, I was like, wow, it's actually longer than I first thought. Because everybody usually thinks about the right-hand column, jobs in wind power, right? But there's a lot more to it than the construction part.
How does that compare to like an oil and gas pipeline or an oil and gas refinery or something like that? Is the list of...
The amount of people that need to work on a refinery is much higher. Yeah, there's like a couple thousand needed on a project to build a giant refinery. The capital expenditure is higher. That said, when they do crunch the numbers on a dollar or jobs per megawatt basis, per dollars invested, ends up renewables, it's more because there's more types of renewable energy distributed over a wider